polite, it was an ordinary evening at the Prestige Bistro, a restaurant that boasted luxury, exclusivity, and an impressive clientele. The atmosphere was sophisticated, with the rich aroma of gourmet dishes filling the air and the soft clinking of fine china and crystal glasses. The soft jazz music playing in the background gave the place an air of refinement, which was exactly what the owner wanted. A place where the city's elite could enjoy both delicious food and the satisfaction of knowing they were in the right place. But on this particular evening, a certain figure caught the attention of the staff and guests alike. A woman in her late 70s walked in slowly, her silver hair tied back in a neat bun, her dress simple but elegant. Her skin, a rich mahogany, was lined with the wisdom of a life well lived. She looked like she belonged anywhere, but the glances from some of the other diners hinted at something else. Surprise. A few whispered among themselves. Is she lost? Someone muttered. She doesn't look like she belongs here. The hostess, a young woman with blonde hair and an ever-so-polite demeanor, barely lifted her gaze as the woman approached the stand. The old woman, with a quiet voice, asked for her reservation under the name Harris. The hostess barely looked at the card, scanning it and then making a dismissive gesture. I'm sorry, ma'am. There must be some mistake. I don't see anything under that name. She almost laughed at the notion, the laughter barely audible but unmistakable. Perhaps you should check somewhere else. The old woman did not flinch, but her face hardened. The smile that had first greeted her guests now faded into something less warm. I believe you should check again. As the tension rose, murmurs began, circulating around the room, with a few people casting sidelong glances. It was only a matter of seconds before the situation took a turn that would make everyone wish they had never judged her. The hostess was confused, scanning through the reservation system once more, her fingers now trembling slightly. She looked up at the old woman and her eyes flickered with something like doubt before quickly returning to her screen. This really isn't possible. We don't have a reservation under that name, the hostess repeated, her voice becoming slightly more strained. Behind her, a few of the restaurant patrons were growing uncomfortable. They had been whispering and exchanging glances, many of them finding amusement in the unfolding scene. I don't think she has the money to eat here, one whispered to another. No, she probably doesn't know the proper etiquette either, came the response. Their voices grew louder, no longer trying to hide their amusement. The old woman remained silent, but a flash of recognition passed over her eyes as she turned slightly to face the room. She had heard comments like these before, had been subjected to them all her life, and she knew that every time it happened, her worth was being measured by others' narrow-minded views. At that moment, the restaurant manager, a middle-aged man with short-cropped hair and a stern demeanor, approached. His gaze flickered between the hostess and the old woman. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice cool but firm, as though the situation was beneath his notice. The hostess, now visibly embarrassed, explained the situation. The manager gave the old woman an almost dismissive glance before turning back to the screen, his eyes scanning for any mistake. It's true. We don't have any reservations under that name, he repeated. A few patrons near the back of the room snickered, the sound of their amusement making the atmosphere even more uncomfortable. The manager, unwilling to give the woman any attention, began ushering her to the side. We can make a reservation for you at another restaurant, though, he offered, his voice now laced with condescension. The old woman raised her chin, her eyes piercing the manager's. I will not leave. I have a reservation. There was a brief silence. The manager, clearly frustrated by her refusal to leave, stared at her for a moment. A small, subtle change occurred in his demeanor as he took another, longer look at her. Her confidence was evident, unshaken, despite the ridicule that surrounded her. Fine, he said reluctantly. But if you refuse to leave, I'll have to call the authorities. His voice was cold, and he tried to make it sound like an empty threat, though even he knew it was a line he was not sure he wanted to cross. But before he could act, the old woman reached into her purse and pulled out a small, old-fashioned card. It looked worn, as if it had been handled many times over the years. She handed it to the manager, who, in that moment, hesitated. Please, take a look, she said calmly, almost softly. The manager's fingers grazed the surface of the card, his face lighting up with disbelief as he read the name. The room fell silent once more, the patrons who had once been laughing now quiet. All attention on the exchange. It was not just any card. It was a distinguished invitation, signed by the city's most prestigious figures. The name on it, Patricia Harris, was one that few in the room could ignore. Patricia Harris. The name sent ripples through the air as if a shift in the universe had just occurred. She wasn't just any woman. She was a highly respected philanthropist, a trailblazer in civil rights, a woman whose influence reached far beyond the confines of a fancy restaurant. The manager's face turned pale as he read the name again. The realization was swift, followed by shame. He stammered an apology, the words tripping over themselves. I didn't realize. Ma'am, I am so sorry. Please allow me to make this right. The manager quickly gestured for a different table, attempting to smooth things over. We'll have you seated at the best table in the house, he said, almost too eagerly. Please forgive the misunderstanding. But Patricia didn't move. She stood tall, unfazed by his sudden rush of kindness. No, she said, her voice unwavering. You've already shown me what you think of people like me. I don't need your pity or your forced kindness. Her words hung in the air, and a cold silence followed. The manager's apology seemed hollow now. The laughter, which had once filled the room, was now replaced by an awkward, uncomfortable stillness. Some patrons, who had once whispered and laughed, now found themselves rethinking their actions. One by one, they began to look around, wondering how they could have been so ignorant. It wasn't long before a few guests who had witnessed the scene began to speak up. A middle-aged woman with short blonde hair stood and walked over to Patricia. I'm so sorry, she said. You didn't deserve that. Please, let us make it right. Her voice was kind, genuine. Other patrons followed suit, offering apologies, or just quietly nodding in solidarity. Patricia's gaze softened, but she didn't answer them right away. She simply took a deep breath. I didn't come here for your apologies, she said calmly. I came here for the food and the experience. You, however, have given me an experience I'll never forget. As Patricia left the Prestige Bistro that evening, the world outside was still the same, but something had shifted. The story of what had happened was already spreading on social media. The hashtag, Respect Patricia Harris, began trending as people rallied behind her, sharing the story of the old woman who had been wronged in a place where she was never meant to belong. The restaurant's reputation was in tatters. Customers began calling for boycotts, their outrage at the treatment of Patricia Harris palpable. Meanwhile, Patricia went about her evening, unbothered, just as she had always done. She didn't need the restaurant's approval, or anyone's apology for that matter. The manager and the staff had learned a hard lesson that night. Respect, dignity, and kindness were not things that could be earned by appearances or wealth. These were qualities that Patricia Harris carried with her every day, no matter where she went. And as she drove away, the light of the city reflected off her window, a gentle reminder that even in moments of cruelty, there was a way to reclaim one's worth. Patricia didn't just walk out of that restaurant. She walked out victorious.